which case I shall open the Santa Fe City Council meeting of Monday, June 17, 2019. Ask you to join us in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We did not meet in closed session, and therefore we shall turn to the open time for public expression. That is an opportunity for any of you that wish to address us on items that are not on this evening's agenda. We can't take action on your point, but we'd certainly be interested in what's on your mind. So now is the time to do so if you wish, on items that are not on the agenda. See no one. Close and turn to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just have a few update items tonight. Actually, last Thursday, the mayor was present for 2 ribbon cuttings that we had, and I just kind of wanted to talk about them for a second so that the community can hear about it as well. The first one was the farmers market, and the farmers market's been going on for many, many years, so it may seem like how could that possibly justify a ribbon cutting? But we just recently, our old vendor for the farmers market was no longer going to be able to support the market. And there was a great amount of work from a couple people in the audience, Danielle O'Leary and Susan Andrade Wax and others, that worked very quickly to put together a partnership with the Agricultural Institute of Marin, who we really think is a fantastic farmers market provider, and very quickly put together a market for this summer. And I think it's particularly impressive because it was just a month or so before summer happened that we had to put it together. So I wanted to thank them for that. And then the Grand Avenue Bridge ribbon cutting was last week as well. And this is a huge project that is a multi-year project. It's been a very long time in the making, but completing it is time consuming because it starts with an intersection at 2nd and Grand and completely redoing that, and then the Grand Avenue Bridge over the canal, and then it's all of East Francisco Boulevard sidewalk enhancement or widening the sidewalk to connect all the way down to Bellum where the sidewalk was widened during the freeway interchange. So we're piece by piece making our way through this whole project, which I think is it doesn't get a lot of the fanfare or glory because it sounds like it's a boring infrastructure project, but I think it's one of the most important things we're doing because we're connecting 2 whole regions of the city that aren't very well connected at all together right now and making them much easier to get from one place to the next. So I just felt like it was important to call those 2 out. There is a lot going on. We have more ribbon cuttings coming up this summer. We'll be doing probably next to be Station 57. That's completely been rebuilt. And also I know we'll have the Francisco Boulevard West flip with the smart tracks, and Anderson Drive intersection and phase 1 of the multi-use path is all complete as well. So those will be coming up too. One other thing I just wanted to point out is that we have a lot of events, kind of signature events downtown. The Criterium's coming up later in July. But there's also a lot of smaller events, and Community Services is putting a lot of focus now on just neighborhood, drop into your neighborhood park for this event that's going on. Maybe there's a movie or a band. There's one that's coming up this Friday at Terra Linda Park from 5 to 7 p.m., and there will be live music, and people are encouraged to bring a picnic dinner and a blanket. And so I think that we spend a lot of time on sort of the big events that everyone is aware of, but it's also worth noting that this Friday is the very first day of summer, and we'll also have this summer kickoff at Terra Linda Park. So thank you.
Good report. Yeah, where did spring go anyway? And Public Works to be complimented on the bridge. I don't want anybody to compare the construction period to the Golden Gate, but it went pretty well. And thanks for doing so. And Kate was at the farmers market, so it was fun stuff. That's enjoyable. So thanks for mentioning those, Jim. We'll now turn to the consent calendar, items 4A through 4J, a number of them, unless someone would like to hold one or more items. Now would be the time to do so.
I would ask that we hold items C, D, and E.
Okay, any others, anybody? Anybody? No? Then I will ask for public comment with regard to the remaining items, that is, with the exception of C, D, and E. Anyone wish to address this? Yes, sir. C, I shall. I'll summarize a little bit. Flavored tobacco. D, rental housing dispute resolution ordinance. And E, causes required for eviction ordinance. Those three. We are. No, I'm glad you asked. We will cover the consent items now. We'll then move to C and then D and E. We'll take them as non-consent items individually. So anyone? Close, back, motion with regard to the remaining items?
I move item 4 excluding C, D, and E.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Move to second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Cullen.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 4-0. We'll turn to C, flavored tobacco products ban ordinance adoption. We've had, this is second reading, so we've had a number of occasions to discuss this, but you must have something specific.
Well, first of all, Mayor, I understand that there may be people here who wish to speak on the matter, and I wanted to give them that opportunity, which is why I pulled it off consent, or asked that it be pulled off consent. But then I also had a comment about it before we actually render our vote.
And you prefer to do that?
I'd prefer to do that after we
Okay,
hear public
sure,
comments,
that's
yes.
Any other comments? In which case, I'm presuming there's not a staff report, or is there? It hasn't changed since we last heard this item.
Mayor, we don't have a staff report. I wouldn't mind making a quick kind
Please.
of clarification for the audience of why this is on the agenda again. And that is that when we have an ordinance, we're required to do it in 2 readings. Staff thinks of the first reading as kind of the council deliberation, community input, and the council gives us direction. Typically, when it comes back on the consent calendar for a second reading, 9 times out of 10, it's a very routine matter, and there isn't any further public comment at that point because the project has already been, quote, approved. That's just what's most common. This one's a little less common because I know we have people that are here to talk about it. But just to let those that are here know, the item did get approved. The first reading got approved when the council heard this last. And so the council voted to ban flavored tobacco, and I believe the council voted to start that ban on January 1st of 2020. So that's the, do I have that right?
2021.
2021, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. So that's the action that the council has already taken. So if this were a normal item, it would just be a routine saying, yes, it's the second reading and the final adoption of the ordinance. So I believe in the case the city attorney wants to add anything, you're open to take public comment, but I guess I wanted to clarify that it's not the same as opening up the item new and trying to get a different result or something like that. I think the council's already provided very clear direction that this is something that the council wants to support.
So, Mr. Mayor, I would just add that the council should take public comment on this and the other items that were pulled. But the other point about second reading, or what we call adoption after the ordinance is introduced at first reading, is that if there was some change in a decision to make substantive changes as opposed to noting some typographical error or something like that, that the ordinance would not be able to be adopted this evening. It would have to be reintroduced. So if there's a substantive change, then it won't be adopted tonight.
And, excuse me, thanks for the clarification, in which case we shall open public, keeping in mind this is the second reading. Anyone? I'm going to close. But you got to be, yeah, come on up. Reopen, but
Sorry, it's my first time doing this.
that's
so
okay.
no.
That's okay.
Hi, my name is Ryan Green. I am going to be a freshman at UC Davis. I'm doing an internship where I study tobacco and work with Smoke-Free Marin Coalition. I am in favor of the flavor ban passing. vaping and e-cigarette use has been deemed an epidemic at both a federal and a local level. The recent Marin County Grand Jury report released on May 16th, 2019 is called Vaping, an Under-the-Radar Epidemic, as an arising issue in Marin County. The report speaks to the alarming increase in the use of electronic cigarettes and other vaping devices by young people in our county. Matt Willis, the public health officer, is quoted saying almost a third of Marin County 11th graders are regularly using harmful nicotine-containing products that are highly addictive. 47% admitted to have trying vaping. Vaping among Marin County 7th, 9th, and 11th graders has more than doubled in the past 2 years, with the largest increase from 11 to 28% happening among 11th graders. This past school year, I spent a lot of time surveying and talking to high school students through a research fellowship in vaping. The percentages in the report actually seem to underrepresent the current statistics as teen usage continues to rise. I've led numerous discussions with high school students, and the amount who have tried vaping numbered close to 75% consistently, rather than the 47. Flavored vapes are incredibly popular among younger students, particularly mango and other flavors, and it is incredibly easy for them to gain access to these flavors. Continuing to allow them in this county would make it even easier. An exception for people over 21 would not solve the problem, but instead actually make it worse, as San Rafael would end up being a safe haven for underage vaping, as other neighboring regions are much stricter. I urge you to pass this ordinance with no exceptions. Thank you.
And thanks for your comment, and I didn't mean to rush you. My daughter went to Davis, so have a great time.
Good evening. My name is Leanne Wise, and I live in San Rafael. I am the Director of Pediatrics for Kaiser Permanente. On behalf of the 22 pediatricians I work with and the roughly 22,000 children we serve, I just want to share how quickly this industry has permeated into the lives of the children we serve. We honestly cannot keep up with the explosion of needs, including how to quit, for our young members at Kaiser Permanente. We as providers have had to learn how to calculate the dosages for nicotine patches for kids, young children. This was not something we ever were trained to do in an attempt to help them. I'm not here to address nor to debate the civil liberties of adults. We honestly are creating a new generation of tobacco-addicted people. The volume of tobacco and other chemicals are known to be much higher than a person would be able to smoke at one time, adding to the health burden and physiological consequences. I am here to tell you all there will never be a study finding and touting the health benefits of nicotine. Alcohol has those studies every day. Drink wine, but not too much. Drink Pinot, but get your grapes from a blue zone area. Coffee, have a cup. You can have 6 cups this week. Next week, it's probably down to 4 again. Tobacco and the chemicals to produce these smokeless options are never going to have benefits. Among youth, these products are more popular than any traditional tobacco product. The use is off the charts for these kids. I went to 3 high school commencements this past week, and I heard mentioned the joys of vaping in class in front of oblivious teachers. How is this okay? How is this so casually thought of by these kids? What I find most concerning about the rise of vaping is that people who would have never smoked otherwise, especially these young children, are taking up the habit. It's one thing if you convert from cigarette smoking to vaping. It's quite another thing to start up nicotine use by vaping. Vaping is big tobacco's bait and switch. This community stands against certain types of big box industries, advancement, and likes to have thoughtful, health-aligned principles reflective of this county and keeping people healthy. We're smarter than this, and there are children depending upon us, and we cannot afford to let them down. Thank you.
And thanks for your comments. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Senta Ritter. I live in San Rafael, and I'm a rising senior at San Rafael High School. I'm studying tobacco and vaping and policy, and I'm a member of the Smoke-Free Youth Coalition and the Coalition Connection. I'm here tonight to represent the youth population in Marin County. Every day I see what the vaping epidemic is doing to my generation. Teenagers have become dependent on vape products and sneak off into the bathroom or sit in their cars during lunch to Juul. The flavors that mask the harsh taste of tobacco make it easy for teens to become addicted to nicotine, in addition to making vaping even more appealing. The exciting new flavors pull kids in, and the tobacco companies know this. According to the California Department of Public Health, 3 out of 4 users of e-cigarettes started with a flavored product. It's also important to note that flavored e-cigarettes aren't the only problem. Many teens turn to other flavored tobacco products such as small cigars like Swisher Sweets and cigarillos. Overall, flavored products are harmful in any capacity, and tobacco is still the leading cause of preventable death in the United States. I urge you to pass the flavor ban without exemptions. Teens get their flavored vape products from older friends and siblings who can legally buy these products. If 21 and over businesses are exempt, teens will still be able to acquire these harmful flavored tobacco products. Additionally, this exemption would encourage retailers from other cities in Marin to move into San Rafael, creating an overall increase in access. My generation is supposed to be the generation that ends smoking. Do not let us become another generation addicted to nicotine, this time through e-cigarettes and flavored tobacco products. Thank you for removing any exemptions and working to make San Rafael a better place. I'm very hopeful of the positive change that this policy will bring. Thank you for your work.
And thanks for your comments. Anyone else? Pat?
Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
My name is Pat Kendall, and I'm here both for Helping Marin Partnership and for Kaiser Permanente. Everything, I've crossed off everything. There's only one thing that hasn't been said, and I think you know this, but it's worth saying, and that is you are at the top of this totem pole. The healthcare industry cannot do what you're going to do tonight, and that is to ban this vaping. We can't do it. And we implore you to do the right thing, because you are the leaders in our community, and you have the right and the privilege and the responsibility to stop this, so that, as they have said, that this isn't going to get any worse for the generation of kids who are already addicted. So I implore you for your responsibility to do that. And I guess my only question is, why 2021? So I put that out, but after you said if something's substantive, you'd have to start all over again, so maybe we don't want to do that. But I'm just curious, why is 2021? So thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Close and come back for further comment.
There might have been one more person.
Is there? Is someone else? Going once, going twice, this is it.
Yeah, you're quick with the gavel. My name is Lori Bremner. I'm the California Grassroots Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and I want to applaud this council for passing a comprehensive ordinance to protect the youth of San Rafael. When we were here for the first reading, we talked a bit about the state bill SB 38 that was moving in the House at that time. That bill has now failed, so it's very important that you did take action rather than expect the state to get it done anytime soon. Tobacco companies moved in, and of course, since they own Sacramento, that bill didn't progress. So I do ask that you proceed with this ordinance with no exemptions. I'm glad that you learned from Oakland, which passed an ordinance with exemptions for adults-only stores, and it's been a disaster for them to try to implement. And now they've got to try to go back and fix it, taking everybody's time to do so, and that we not delay implementation any longer, because the need is really urgent. More San Rafael kids are getting addicted every single day, and we're saying we don't care about them if we delay this any longer. So thank you very much for passing a comprehensive ordinance.
And thank you for your comments. Okay, guys. Anyone else? In which case we'll close. And I'll just comment. Oftentimes we hear comments from the public, but seldom, if ever, have we heard, in my view, four more informed participants have presented to us. So we thank you. Certainly I thank you, and I think we thank you for your input. It's great to hear, and particularly for the young folks that joined us this evening. So thank you so much for doing so. Having said that, comments? You have a comment, I believe?
If I could, I'd like to make a motion, but first let me explain the motion that I'm about to make. And by way of background, partly for Pat Kendall's edification, but for the rest of the folks who may not have been here on June 3rd when we debated this at length, we reached an impasse as a council. Two of us were in favor of the ban as proposed tonight. Two of us were in favor of the ban with a very narrow exemption, and one was opposed to the ban. After extensive discussion and several failed motions, the one who was opposed, John Gamblin, who's not here this evening, came around to favoring the ban outright, but on the condition that it be delayed in its implementation to January of 2021. While I disagree ultimately with what he had proposed and what the majority proposed, I broadly endorse the goals of the ban. My concern was that of the 50-plus licensed tobacco retailers, we were proposing to eliminate the sale of flavored tobacco by all but 3, and those 3 would have to ensure that certain procedures were in place so that they could continue to sell these flavored tobacco products. However, getting to today, the motion that I would like to propose is that we approve the ban and we finally adopt the ordinance. The reason I'm changing my vote is a personal one, and personal to my absent council member. He had a personal matter that pulled him away this evening. He was prepared to come back in the middle of this proceeding in order to cast the deciding vote, but rather than force him to do that at fairly significant personal sacrifice, I agreed to take action that would enable this to pass this evening, even though I have reservations, as I just explained. So before I make my motion, if there are any other comments anyone wishes to make, I'm happy to stop.
Make your motion. We'll call for a second, then further comment.
Sure. Then my motion is that we finally adopt the ordinance.
Second?
Comment. Yes, so just to build on what was already said, we did talk about this on June 3rd as well as previously. So there was hours of public testimony from people who are both for the ban and against the ban. In addition, we received many, many emails. So don't want to replay all of that tonight, but I am going to vote no on this, but I wanted to clarify why. I 100% agree that we need a ban, that the teenage addiction rates are unbelievable and terrifying. I felt San Rafael had crafted an ordinance with very narrow exceptions for the stores that check IDs, and that way we could honor the local business community as well as keep the product out of the hands of youth. The other thing I had said that night was we have to continue to advocate at the state level. Having every jurisdiction throughout California is a very long way to go about it, and I'm hopeful the state will take this up again, because I firmly believe that is where these types of policies and broad bans should be done. Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you have any comment? My only comment's simple. I think the four individuals that came before us this evening spoke clearly and with dedication, conviction for the position taken, that I'm going to vote in favor of the ban. I think that you were persuasive. I have no reservation, quite frankly, for the reasons you've cited, and thank you once again for doing so. So with that, I'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
No.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 3-0, and thanks
3-1.
again. 3-1, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. We'll move on to item D, rental housing dispute resolution ordinance adoption.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
may I explain why I asked this to be
Please.
held as well?
Yeah, please.
So if we can abbreviate these two items by calling them the two landlord-tenant ordinances that we adopted at our last meeting. They're coming back for second reading, and we've had an explanation, again, of the significance of a second reading. I had no intention of changing my vote, and my views haven't changed on these two ordinances, and I'm not aware that any other views up here have. But I have had the privilege of meeting with and/or talking to several people who feel somewhat aggrieved by the ordinance as it stands. I see one of them here this evening. I wanted to make sure that if any of them showed up, they had an opportunity to talk before we went ahead and took action on this.
Good, and thanks for pulling. Any other comments before we open? Public comment with regard to either or. Say again, come up, please. Your question is?
I was just whether this is open on just the mediation or both ordinances?
Both.
Okay, thank you. My name is Michael Burke. I tried to speak here at the last time. I will keep my comments very brief this time and make it within the time limits.
Thank you.
I do fully support the mediation ordinance. I would ask, however, that you, thank you for taking the Just Cause ordinance off the consent calendar and voting on it separately. I would like you to consider one small but very important modification before passing it. I realize it will delay implementation of the ordinance, but the change is very important and it will not affect the desired outcome of your ordinance. While I am generally against the ordinance, I understand that you need to follow through with it. My concern is that it limits owners from evicting that one bad apple, the tenant that is disrupting the entire building, possibly carrying on illegal activities. With your Just Cause ordinance in place, you provide that tenant with a defense in an unlawful detainer action. It puts the burden of proof on the landlord. This particular eviction usually involves a disturbance brought to the attention of the owner by another tenant. The tenant in question is doing, the bad apple tenant in question is doing illegal activity or somehow disrupting all of the other tenants' peace and quiet. This is very difficult to prove. The other tenants will not testify. You cannot get the police to do a surveillance. Without a just cause ordinance, this is easily resolved by giving the tenant a 30-day notice without explanation. With a just cause ordinance in place, it becomes near impossible to evict this tenant, and it is at a great cost to the other good tenants in the building who have to live with this bad apple. There's one possible solution that was fostered by Scott Gerber in committee. Limit the ordinance to tenancies that are in place for 12 months. The bad apple shows themselves in the first 12 months. You are still protecting the long-term tenants, and I believe that is in your interest, your intent. The good tenants need their landlord to have the ability to get rid of the bad tenant. Other cities in Marin are looking to the city of San Rafael to see how to draft their ordinances. You have made many positive changes that over that previously done by the county and the town of Fairfax. Please make yours one that they can copy. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Pastor Tom Gable of Marin Lutheran Church, part of the Marin Organizing Committee. I live and own a home in Terra Linda. As we have heard in the last two sessions when we've talked about this, some of our neighbors who rent, about 47-48% in San Rafael, are being battered and beaten by unconscionable rent increases. As we've heard from those neighbors, these rent increases can lead to a whole host of unhealthy outcomes, from parents foregoing medicines to pay for rent, to families tolerating dangerous apartment conditions and fear of eviction. Allowing this situation to continue is not an option. Thankfully, you all have been working in good faith to remedy these unjust conditions. Tonight, we urge you again to continue doing the right thing for our neighbors who rent. We urge you to pass the mandatory mediation and just cause. Thank you.
Thank you. You're just in support, I guess. Okay, that's fine. That's good. Anybody else? Close. Back. Got a question of either our city attorney or perhaps Councilmember McCullough, who did spend a considerable amount of time on both of these, and to be applauded for the work that he has done to bring this to us. And I know it's speculative, but I'm curious whether or not you have any experience or comments with regard to the concern or the recommendation of 12 months.
I do. I do, meaning that I spoke at length with Michael about that, and while I'm sympathetic to his concerns, and I think that they're not unreasonable, I ultimately do disagree that the just cause ordinance provides no leeway or discretion to a landlord who needs to eliminate a tenant in the first 12 months. That said, what I told him and what I wanted to say this evening is, while my intention is to hold to my original vote and vote in favor of both of these ordinances, I feel very strongly, even more so now after having spoken to Mr. Burke and others, that we need to do what we committed, some more explicitly than others, to doing, and that is, in 12 months, let's come back and let's review the impact these ordinances are having both on our tenants and on our landlords. And let's make sure that we've gotten this right. I'm sure that the county and other jurisdictions that adopt similar landlord-tenant ordinances will be doing the same thing. But we will have an opportunity then, particularly if both landlords and landlord groups and tenant groups collect data that they think would be helpful, data that is beyond simply anecdotal information, but data on what it means to not have, for example, a 12-month window during which at-will evictions can take place before just cause goes into effect. So my goal is, in 12 months, let's revisit, let's fine-tune or make amendments as necessary, but let's see that these two ordinances serve the purpose that we intended them to serve when we passed them 2 weeks ago.
And I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's my reaction. This is not necessarily cast in stone, but rather a document too, if you wish, that we can improve upon over time, but I think this is an appropriate starting point. I'm pleased to hear you say that. Maribeth?
And I was absent at the first reading of this. It is only because of the report back and our commitment to review the impact of these measures that I will be voting in favor of them. I'm very concerned that these may lead to the exact opposite outcome of what we are hoping for.
Kate, no. In which case, it sounds like we're ready for, I'll let you pass for the city attorney, ready for a motion with
Well-
regard to D.
Yes, thank you. I was going to propose that we do these in order. So I move that we finally adopt Ordinance 1971, which is the Rental Housing Dispute Resolution Ordinance.
Second.
Vote and second roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 4-0, and cause for eviction ordinance?
Yeah,
Next
I
item.
move that we finally adopt Ordinance 1972, cause required for eviction ordinance.
Second.
Vote and second roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 4-0. Thank you very much. We'll move on to special presentation. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Mayor and Council, I want to introduce Mark Van Gorder and Tony Walls from PG&E. They would like to make a presentation about their vegetation management program. They've also let me know that if there's other questions from you or the public that's here tonight, that they would be happy to answer other questions as well. But they have a short presentation first and then are ready to entertain questions.
And thanks for that, and thanks for being here this evening. This is on a lot of people's minds, so glad you're here.
Sure, absolutely. I apologize too. I have some allergies, so it's that time of year. I bought 4 quarts of natural organic honey, and I'm hoping, my fingers crossed.
4 quarts?
It's a lot, I know. It goes fast. So I'm Mark Van Gorder. I handle public affairs for Pacific Gas and Electric Company for the North Bay, so Marin, Napa counties, Benicia and Vallejo. I will be speaking especially briefly tonight for 2 reasons. One, I can barely talk. 2, Tony Walls is here with us, as Bill mentioned, who is our vegetation manager for the North Bay. I want to step up and say briefly, so we've come specifically tonight as requested to talk about enhanced vegetation management, standard vegetation management, and answer those questions.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm compelled to ask because I went through the same thing. You want some water?
Thank you. I've got some
Oh,
other.
you've got some honey,
But
right?
thank you
Yeah.
very much. Yes,
All right,
I
thank you.
forgot the honey. Thank you. Main point being, we can make a more detailed presentation. There is an open house, and I will send this out. It's not publicly released, but it's fine to say. I believe it's in latter part of July. I think I know the date, but I won't say it just in case I'm wrong. There is an open house that we'll be having, I believe, at the Embassy Suites in San Rafael from 6 to 8. I'll send that information out to you and to all city managers in the county of Marin. It's an open house. So we'll answer a lot of those questions there if people have those. But I'll let Tony get up and go through his right now.
Thank you.
Is this my clicker? Is this functional? All right. Good evening, and thanks everyone for your time. My name is Tony Walls. I work for Pacific Gas and Electric in their vegetation management program. I'm here to briefly discuss with you our vegetation management practices to protect our power lines. So throughout the PG&E territory, there's over 100 million trees that have the ability to grow or fall into our power lines. Annually, to mitigate that risk, we trim or prune or remove about 1.4 million trees throughout our system, including right here in what we call North Bay division of our system, which is Marin County and Napa County. So we also do a cycle of patrols to address dead, dying, diseased, or decayed trees. So really what we do is primarily for public safety, first and foremost, but also for electric reliability, so trees don't fall into the power lines, cause outages, things of that nature. But also we're compelled by regulatory requirements set forth by FERC and CPUC. So really briefly, let me go back. I apologize. So we have a routine maintenance program. We inspect every inch of our power lines on an annual basis, and then we prescribe trees that may encroach upon our facilities, breach regulatory requirements, clearance requirements, or have the ability to fall or come into contact with the power lines. That's an annual program. In fact, I believe we are doing our annual work in San Rafael now. So you may see some right tree trucks driving around neighborhoods, trimming back trees away from our power lines. Due to changing wildfire conditions in the state of California, PG&E has implemented our Enhanced Vegetation Management Program. And this is a little bit different in scope, a little enhanced scope to our routine maintenance program. So this graphic is pretty detailed and it's well done, but basically what it describes here is you have your regulatory requirements. Actually, let me digress. So we are focusing this program in the high fire threat district of California. That was a map, if you will, that was adopted by the Public Utilities Commission in the end of 2017, which breaks the state of California down into fire risk tiers, if you will. So tier 3 is the most extreme wildfire risk based on numerous factors and input from many stakeholders throughout the state. And there's also a tier 2, which is a little bit less reduced fire risk, but still extreme, I guess. Extreme and very high, let's call it that. So this work is focused on those tiers of the high fire threat district. So if you look at this map here, you can see the city limits of San Rafael outlined, and you can see there's quite a bit of extreme tier 3 surrounding the city, with just a little bit on the southwestern edge, but quite a bit of tier 2 within the city limits as well. So these are areas that we will be focusing our enhanced vegetation management over the next several years. Back to this graphic. So this work is to meet or exceed our regulatory requirement work and our public safety work. And so in the high fire threat district, we have to keep all trees at least 4 feet away from the conductors at all times. That's below to the sides. It's a radius clearance around the conductors. When we identify a tree that might encroach upon that, we will trim that tree back at least 12 feet away from the conductors. So that will be the minimum clearance that we'll achieve at the time of trim for trees that we think will encroach upon those regulatory requirements for clearance. The other component of the enhanced vegetation management is removing all overhanging limbs above our power lines. So you see that zone, if you will, kind of straight up about 4 feet off to the sides of primary high voltage conductors, and then anything to the sky. So that's the focus of the enhanced vegetation management. We'll also be focusing on removing any dead, dying, or diseased trees when we do these inspections and subsequent work, as well as species that we have identified that have high failure potentials, and specifically to regions that we will mitigate those trees as well. So in this area, Monterey cypress, for instance, are very problematic trees. They fail frequently into the power lines, and so we will be looking to remove those trees where we can. That's basically it in a nutshell at a very high level of what we do every day here. So we don't have a great deal of enhanced vegetation management work here in the city this year. We're still in a little bit of the planning phase for the second half of our year, so it is very possible, but it would be very little, as we are focused on the tier 3 in our service territory this year. However, in the upcoming years, as you see, there's quite a bit of the tier 2. We will be focusing this enhanced vegetation management efforts within those areas as well.
Thanks for your presentation. So when do we get elevated tier 2 addressed?
next several years. We don't have a firm schedule at this point, but our plan is to address our whole system within the next several years.
Second, I was curious on the previous slide, if you go back, no, the other one. There you go.
Yes, sir.
Why 12 feet?
It's that's a good question. It's a clearance that the CPUC ultimately decided was a sufficient amount for most species to maintain our clearance requirements.
So maintain's interesting to me. Are you going to maintain 12 feet?
That's our plan, yes. So
my curiosity would be, why not go more than 12? Because it'll grow back, right? So you're going to be encroaching upon the 12-foot
yeah, in many cases
radius that you
yes.
subscribe to. So that means you have to come back every year?
Well, we'll come back every year no matter what, because we want to make sure we catch dead, dying, or diseased trees that may have died subsequent to our annual inspections.
But with regard to maintenance of your
but we would also maintain those 12 feet clearances,
so you have to
correct?
go back and do it every year?
Potentially, unless we go further, right? And it's also, if a tree is already clear, we can let it grow closer to the lines until we think it's going to encroach again, and we would maintain it.
You know, how much discretion, if any, do the residents have if that tree happens to be in their backyard or front yard? How much discretion do the residents have?
Well, we're adhering to regulatory requirements, so the discretion.
You're saying none. I'm just trying to understand this a little better.
Yeah, there's little wiggle room. Yes.
Okay. Other questions?
Mirabel. Question. Can you tell me a little bit about the budget for this matter on this enhanced vegetation, particularly contrasting it to what the budget was previously, what it is now, and what you anticipate for the future?
You know, I can't really speak to that. It's more, right? I can't give you specific figures, but obviously we are investing more into the program for public safety.
We don't always have the answers to the questions, but we're happy to get you the answer.
Yeah,
So,
I would
yeah,
be.
I don't know that Tony knows that. I certainly don't have the budget this year over last year. We're happy to get that answer to Manager Schutz and then share it with the council.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, in the budget metric being delayed, do you have any other metric that we can use to get some sense of how much more you're doing on miles inspected, number of trees?
Again, we can get that to you at a later time. Sorry. So it's going to be the enhanced vegetation management will be focused in tier 3. So we can give you mileage figures for our overhead power lines within the high fire threat district, sure.
Okay,
I don't have that figure with me tonight.
And I'm interested in what it was before and what it's going to be now and what you expect it to be for the future, so we can see like a trajectory.
Sure. And I will reiterate that we inspect every inch of our power lines on an annual basis for regulatory requirements and public safety. So we do actually prune trees away from the power lines all year round throughout our service territory.
And you can provide that to our city manager if you would, Kate?
Yeah. Thank you, Tony and Mark, for coming. Can you go back to the slide that shows the map?
I sure can.
Yeah. So, and I do understand the time frame is a couple of years. When I look at the several years, couple of years. Okay, I'm gonna mince years here, but okay. Tier 2 and 3. So those are primarily open space. I mean, I know San Rafael, and obviously there are going to be houses in some of that. But when I'm looking at it, it's like, oh, there's Gold Hill, there's San Rafael Hill. You know, there's the ridge between us and the county.
Yes.
So how are you coordinating, or how are we here, because we're going to be doing our own work and the county's going to be doing work, how are we all going to get on the same page, right? Because we all need to be working in the same space together. This is, a lot of it's open space. Some of them don't even have power lines. So if they don't have power lines, you're not working in them at all.
You're correct.
Okay, so if there's no power lines, let's say on Gold Hill, I think there are some though. There are, but on the parts where there aren't, you're not working in that area.
Yes. We're only addressing vegetation that could impact our facilities.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Please, yeah.
What about our urban tree canopy here, particularly in the older neighborhoods of San Rafael, where we can all visualize trees, and I'm thinking sycamore trees in particular, whose branches go up and envelop the power lines. The 12-foot clearance on either side doesn't exist, and I would suspect if it were to exist, it would mean taking down those trees, which would really be an impact on our neighborhoods.
We actually frequently trim trees back 12 feet or more within the city limits already. If you drive down Lincoln, you'll see quite a few of those sycamores that have been pruned back quite a substantial distance. We have transmission lines that go through that right away as well. So we do perform those type of clearances already. I think the significant difference will be removing limbs and branches overhanging our power lines. That's where you would see some significant difference, and it will be noticeable.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but I can visualize on Mary Street, for example,
Yes.
that the power line goes right through the tree canopy of several sycamores in a row.
Yes.
I can visualize tree branches being cut back to accommodate those lines, but I can't visualize 12 feet of clearance. Are you saying that the entire tree or the top of the tree might be taken out in order to avoid coming within 12 feet of those power lines?
Avoid coming within 12 feet of the power line, within clearance requirements, and falling into the power lines. Our outage history indicates that that's where one of our largest problems are, branches falling into the high voltage power lines. So to mitigate that risk completely, we will remove those limbs. Again, in the high fire threat district. So this is, if it's outside of that, what we call local responsibility area, the clearance requirements are much smaller, and we wouldn't necessarily remove all canopies.
So in these neighborhoods I'm talking about, they are not the tier 1 tier 2 and tier 3 areas. So
We
I
would be
need to have
managing
that
them
consent.
differently. Yes.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Then we appreciate the work you're doing, and, sooner is better than later, so thanks for protecting our interest as well as your own.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Oh,
Thank you.
Just for the council's benefit and for the public who may be watching at home, I don't know if the video's up.
thousands.
The open house is in fact on July 30th. It's at the Embassy Suites, the Embassy Suites Hotel. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up. I took a screenshot of this so that I could share this with you. But so July 30th. Did I say June? July 30th, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Embassy Suites San Rafael, and it's the Mill Valley and Sausalito Ballrooms, 101 McInnes Parkway, San Rafael. So this is an open house for the public. I will be making a presentation as well as the Marin County mayors and city councils meeting on June 26th.
Just around the corner. Thank you very much. We'll now turn to other agenda items, starting with 6A, grand jury response to wildfire preparedness. Chief.
Mayor, members of City Council, ladies and gentlemen, Christopher Gray, Fire Chief, and here with me, Emergency Manager Quinn Gardner. We have before you a grand jury report on wildfire preparedness. It's entitled Wildfire Preparedness, A New Approach. I think that is quite apt, and I'll try to give a little background in terms of the perspective of why I think so. In the 1950s, the state of California, following the war, actually developed to a large extent what we have today as a framework of an emergency response system. So the very first mutual aid system was developed in the 50s, and it wasn't until the 1970s, and as you can imagine, following several very serious fires, particularly in Southern California, that they continued to refine the system, and they developed a multi-agency coordination system and an incident command system that are in use today on a global basis. And I think it's that responsiveness to these large-scale emergencies that put us in a position of really this borderless response that we appreciate and certainly receive the benefits of today. And that borderless response system, though, is reactive. It's following the event. And so a couple of the points that I think appropriately the grand jury report identifies is what are we doing about pre-ignition and suppression on a coordinated basis. And while we do very well on a coordinated response on a daily basis to incidents that occur, we do very little on a coordinated response to prevention activities, where we could likely really benefit from the economy of scale and leveraging the benefits of working together, because as we know, fires don't have boundaries, and we have boundaries that intersperse our community. In the last week, we had 3 vegetation fires. Fortunately, the wind and the weather were cooperative, but nevertheless, they were all started by human activity. One in China Camp, one in the Glenwood neighborhood, and then one over the weekend in the Canalways area. So all very troubling, immediate reminders of the risk we face. Fortunately, we have a rapid response system, but again, we had firefighters there at the ready and were able to suppress those fires, and in all 3 cases limit those to under a quarter of an acre. But we had the weather at our advantage. And I think it's important to recognize that will not always be the case. So it really is truly a question of not if, but when this fire is going to occur and what we can do. Recently, we had, the council adopted a 38-point plan. There are efforts underway that I've frankly not seen before, and I applaud on a countywide basis. Marin Ready Together, we have representation from the council and staff. There's also, and as the Marin Civil Grand Jury suggests, there is a countywide effort in the midst of forming a JPA that will be hopefully before the voters in March. Your city manager and fire chief and emergency manager are all involved in those processes. And while we have a local responsibility here in San Rafael, much like the comparison, if you do everything right and your neighbor does nothing, we're all at risk. And so this is a close partnership that I think will benefit us. We've added, I think by necessity, a couple of comments in here and an appendix in a response. This is also the first time I've ever seen a response to a grand jury report that was a unified response, a cooperative effort by all the Marin managers and fire chiefs, which I think is notable. The JPA committee met last week, and our continued efforts locally will have the second meeting of our Citizen Advisory Committee on our Wildfire Action Plan taking place on Wednesday. So there's actually a lot of work that we're undergoing, and feel very confident in some of the efforts that are being made. There are a series of both findings and recommendations that are contained within the report. And so as I mentioned, there was a unified response to all of those. And in addition, we've had several San Rafael specific comments that we made. The only adjustment I would recommend that the council allow us to make is one to add emphasis on the adoption of our 38-point plan. It's referenced in the appendix that's included in our official response and the report, but actually when we provided information to the grand jury, it was a 37-point plan, and it was still a draft. It had not been adopted, and I think it would be advisable to, and again, enhance our response, and that's the only suggested change I would make from our recommendation, which is to adopt the resolution that you have before you authorizing our response to the grand jury report. I will comment also that our 38-point plan literally has a crosswalk to every finding and recommendation that are included in the grand jury report, and I also believe that that's notable. So it's, again, very comprehensive. I think we're on the right track. We're working both individually and collectively towards a beneficial plan for the community that we serve. And again, I'm here with Quinn and available to address any questions that you would have.
Thank you, Chief. Losing my voice here, obviously. Gwen, do you have anything to add? Well, trying to recover here.
Not in particular. I think just the emphasis again, spent some time once again looking at all these documents combined, and Chief made the point, but all the recommendations that are included in this plan, we have either very directly or are incorporated into our action plan. So we do think it's worth kind of tweaking our response to kind of reemphasize that a little bit more.
And I appreciate that, because I do think that if I can get through this, you've done a tremendous job, in my view, I think in everyone's view, helping us address the immediate concerns we have with regard to our community by putting together the 37 plus the one point to make it number 38. So it is comprehensive in connection with the county's efforts. So I'm pleased that we seem to be covering both those bases. But I do feel pretty strongly, since our own wildfire prevention and protection action plan, which you've prepared for us, has been adopted by the council as a framework to further advances, as Jim pointed out, of course, when it was presented, that it be a part of our response. I'll feel much more comfortable for everybody signing this if I know that it is recognized, the work that San Rafael and specifically and primarily you have done. In addition, you probably know we have formed a wildfire prevention committee. In fact, it meets again Wednesday to go through the plan, to fill it out. Again, it was a framework, so we're in the process of expanding that and certainly addressing certain areas where there are ordinances that are required. Mary Beth and I sit on that committee. So I do think it's part of the comprehensive response to the grand jury and their effort to bring us all together on this.
Mayor, if I could make another point, I'll add that while we're working cooperatively with the county and these processes, which I believe in and think are very important, we're not stopping our efforts to prevent a wildfire from spreading in the community. Actively, right behind us on San Rafael Hill, there's a large herd of goats working. They'll be working throughout the community in conjunction with a partnership with the Department of Public Works. And probably while I'm speaking here, there's activity going on in our fire roads that are creating additional fuel breaks and accessibility for us, again, with our partnership with the Department of Public Works. So there's a lot of activity. Yes, you can do a lot of as an individual, but the city itself is improving their level of readiness now too, and into the future.
Well, and I think, speaking on behalf of the community, I think we're all indebted to the work that you're doing. We're not sitting here on our hands talking about this stuff, but you're actually out there doing things, and we'll be accelerating that as time and resources permit. In any case, comments from the public? Good evening.
My name is Belle Cole. I'm with organizing OFA Marin, and we have just put on an event called Firewise, Climate Change, Wildfires and Climate Change, and from that I'm here to represent the findings of that group with respect to this really superb work that's being done here. And endorse it all. I just have a couple of points to make that have been important to us and that were emphasized during our session, is to give even more priority to hardening our homes. Looking through the recommendations of the grand jury report, and also, and I don't know about so much the 38 recommendations probably there, but it seems that we have this. I'm going to read you this from Todd Landau with FireSafe Marin, who says, would like to see is to harden our homes and get to the point where the majority of our home stock is built with materials that are resistant to ignition so that we can avoid the carbon release and loss of life and property that comes with these catastrophic fires. And Kate Sears was also on the panel, and she endorsed this. As we think about hardening our homes and managing our vegetation, we need to remember resiliency. And she said something that I think that the city also endorses. When we harden our homes, we should take the opportunity to make them more energy efficient and cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. In broadening our lenses, we make ourselves a safer, more resilient, richer community. And one more point I want to make, my time is up, and it has to do with public education, which was another very powerful recommendation of the commission. And to say that we agree with this being a high priority, but we have some thoughts that we will be following through from the work we have been doing with the fire department and others to make sure that we set benchmarks for educational goals, numbers, demography, hard-to-reach communities, so that we can measure progress and identify specific obstacles, and work cooperatively with others, and combining efforts with climate change groups such as Resilient Neighborhoods. It's already going on, and so that the fire-wise communities and resilient neighborhoods will reinforce each other. But with these few comments, I just want to endorse what's being said.
And thanks for your comments. Bill?
Good evening, Council. I'm Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael, and I also wanted to emphasize the importance of hardening homes in addition to vegetation management. Just picking up this report, the impression is that we need to go out and remove a lot of vegetation, which of course we do in a sensitive way and paying attention to the whole asset that we're managing in the landscape. But to quote, that with that impression, I went and delved into the report itself from the grand jury. And wanted to call attention on page 7 to their second primary recommendation out of 7 has to do with hardening homes against ember showers. And they also refer people, of course, to Fire Safe Marin. And their very first item is hardening your home is critical. Embers are the most significant cause of home ignitions during wildfires. Protecting your home from embers is critically important and can be as simple as retrofitting vents and, of course, clearing out your gutters and a few things like that. We need to start closest to what we're protecting, which are the structures themselves, and I feel like emphasizing that in the city's response would be well worthwhile, perhaps adding simply a sentence referring to the importance of hardening homes, and no doubt that could be drawn from the 38-point plan, which is already in place. So I would recommend that. Thank you.
And thanks for your comments as well. Anybody else? Evening.
Good evening, council members. Larry Minikis. I'm doing a lot of work with MMWD. It's parallel. It's all one environment, and the real issue is going to be money. And I've mentioned this before. And the public is going to have to understand that we're really this time making an investment. It's not going to be like a tax, but everyone's going to have to do it, and we're going to have to really look for a lot of money because there's a lot of need. We've put this off for decades and decades, and it's going to take quite a few decades to even begin to catch up. And in the meantime, we'll have some fires, but not everything's going to burn. So we're still going to have the problem even after we have the inevitable happen here. So I would encourage you to educate the public that this is an investment, and where it really saves us is going to be in fire insurance, because the more we do, the more it's going to do to stabilize the cost of our fire insurance. And that's the thing that could get most expensive. It's not going to be hardening our homes and all this. It's going to be what the insurance industry decides to do. And what's happening in Mill Valley, I don't know what's happening here, but what I'm hearing in Mill Valley is that there's a lot of fear, and the fear is in vegetation management around the homes. And people are worried that they're going to have to take out their heritage trees and clear everything away. And that is going to be your challenge, is to educate the public into what's really going to be needed. They're still going to be able to maintain vegetation, but things will have to change, and get in front of the fear that people are going to start to talk about with the investments they made or how it's going to change their neighborhood. And that would be my encouragement. Thank you very much.
Excellent points, thank you. Thanks so much. Anybody else? Close. And let me just comment on a couple of the points that were brought up and then open to the others. You're absolutely right about the education of the public, critical, and quite frankly, that's why we have formed this committee of 15, plus Mary Beth and myself, so 17 plus staff. It's to go through the framework that we have, the 30, I'll say 38 points. The last one is to coordinate with the county. But to go through it, because it is a framework to make sure that our community is receptive to that's been proposed and add to where clarity is needed, and perhaps address some of the more sensitive issues to get buy-in from the public. For example, the span from your house. Is it 3 feet? Is it 5 feet? What is it? Frankly, I don't want to get into the business of dictating. In some cases, it might be necessary, in which case we'll have an ordinance. I'm not afraid of that either. But I think if the community is accepting of the conclusions we draw with regard to reasonableness, not only with that point, perhaps others, it's going to work a lot better for everybody within our community. So we want to involve a number of the public, and we said we have 15 thus far, and there'll be ambassadors for the outcome to go through the plan and help us with the education that you made reference to, and you're absolutely right. Certainly funding is going to be required. There will be either a sales tax measure, and I'm guessing now, but seems pretty obvious at this point in time, either sales tax or my preference to be a parcel tax. We'll see how that works to provide for the additional cost. Our department's doing a terrific job, but they too have a limited budget, as you can well imagine, and now the issue is becoming more intense, and they're very receptive to accommodating the community's desire to better protect itself. That's what the 37 points are all about. They've identified that, and now it's our job, your job, the community's job, to put that in place either in concert with the county or some other mechanism, but to make sure that we as a community have addressed the points that our professionals, our fire professionals have recommended to us. So I feel pretty strongly about the effort that's been expended thus far, but there's a lot more to do, and I think as a community we'll be able to do it because, like the three that spoke, throughout the community, everybody is concerned about the possibility, which is a strong possibility, that we might incur a fire such as they experienced in Paradise and Santa Rosa and elsewhere. No one wants that. Certainly we don't, and we'll do everything that we can at this point in time and over the next ensuing years, because we're not going to be able to do it in 1 year, but certainly need to get on with it. And we're committed to do that, like I said, in concert with the county, but to make sure that the unique features that San Rafael has that perhaps other communities don't have are addressed as well. So we'll be fighting this thing on two fronts, that which is prescribed by the county, but also what our community and our professionals have indicated to us is necessary and highly recommended by them, that we greatly respect. So appreciate the comments, and I think that's education. Hardening of the homes, you're right about that. That's a tough one because people get very, it's their mother-in-law's rose bush or some such thing. And so how do we deal with that? The committee, again, meeting again Wednesday, is going to be addressing some of those issues. Some are more obvious than others. We'll go through this a couple of passes to make some decisions and work with our city attorney with regard to ordinances, so that if you're more than willing to, no problem, but if you're not, there is a problem, and we'll pursue that to the protection of everyone within our community. Through those efforts, I'm sure we'll make the progress that the community expects of us. So, with that, other comments? Comment? Further comment? So are we clear as to the fact that we're responding with the responses you've seen, but we're going to add to that some of the outstanding work that our department has provided us thus far? Okay. That's okay with anyone? In which case a motion with regard to this item would be appropriate.
I move that we adopt the grand jury response on wildfire preparedness and authorize the mayor to sign.
With the slight modifications.
With the slight
that we've made
modification
reference
of
to.
the updated plan.
Thank you. A second, rather?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Matter carries 4-0, and Thanks again, Chief, and Quinn, thank you very much for your help on this. Move now to, excuse me, Measure A work plan and CIP program.
Good evening, Mayor. I'm Kevin
Evening.
McGowan of the Department of Public Works, and next to
see
me
you.
is Talia Smith. She is also with the Department of Public Works.
We call her the star of the leadership
You
class,
betcha.
by the way. She was
Got that right.
outstanding.
Tonight, we're going to be talking to you about the Capital Improvement Program for fiscal year 1920. In addition, we need to recognize Nadine Haid and Van Bach from our Finance Department, as well as Susan Andrade-Wax from our Community Services Department, who helped with the development of the program itself. Sorry, I have to kind of look across over that way because our little computer here is not working.
Sure.
The Capital Improvement Program is a planning document that assists the city in identifying and prioritizing capital projects. Tonight, we wanted to make a preliminary presentation of the 3-year Capital Improvement Program, which will be included in the city's overall budget documentation presented on July 15th. The development of this project allows the city to categorize and prioritize capital projects. It also helps us to detail specific funding sources and is a multi-year approach to identifying the city's needs and budgetary constraints for the improvements to city facilities. The program is structured to address projects associated with city-owned projects, drainage projects, park projects, right-of-way or streets, and transportation improvements. Active projects are projects that have been funded in previous fiscal years, while new projects are projects that are to be funded with upcoming fiscal years. Each of these categories have specific funding sources, and some share funding sources in between each project. So that's kind of a short overview, but I'd like to kind of share some completed projects and active projects that we're working on. We've had a rather big year, to tell the truth. We've got a lot of projects that have been finished up this particular year that have been developed for the last 10 to 12 years. So with that, San Rafael's Measure E projects are well underway, with Fire Station 52 being completed this year and the Public Safety Center as well as 57 anticipated to be completed in the next couple months for 57 and I believe at the end of the fiscal year for the Public Safety Center. Several projects associated with the city buildings were completed this year as well. The Falkirk Mansion re-roof was recently replaced. In addition, improvement projects such as the City Hall switchgear project, as well as replacing the flooring at Terra Linda Community Center, have been completed. Upgrades to current lighting systems within the buildings, as well as replacing the majority of the city's street lights with LED lights, were also completed this year with a low-cost loan from PG&E. In January 2019, San Rafael and many jurisdictions within Marin received record-level rainfalls. In Kentfield, the Kentfield rain gauge recorded 52 inches of rainfall this season. That's just amazing if you think about it. Over the last 8 to 10 years, the city of San Rafael has supported the repair and constant maintenance of our 12 pump stations. This commitment to consistently manage and repair our pump stations has helped to minimize impacts to low-lying areas within the city. This year, the city of San Rafael did not experience significant flooding from this record-level rainfall. This is largely due to the city's maintenance efforts to keeping these systems functioning to the maximum extent possible. In addition, the repair of significantly damaged corrugated metal pipe systems on Carrillo and the repair of an outfall system at Caves Pump Station were addressed this year with no damage to adjacent properties. So those particular projects were right next to people's homes as well as their front yards. Public Works is also working with community development and our sustainability coordinator on sea level rise and a vulnerability assessment. This year, city completed construction on several park improvement in projects, including Albert Park. The work at Bret Harte Park is almost complete with the exception of an electrical service that needs to be attached to the restroom. This year, DPW and Community Services have been working closely together to replace the play structures at Pickleweed Park. This heavily utilized park play structure is being replaced, and the work will be completed at the end of June, so we only have a couple weeks left on that one. This year, in addition to our standard roadway resurfacing and repair projects, we have completed the repair of the 2017 storm damage sites, and we are finalizing the installation of the Grand Avenue pedestrian bridge. So that's basically finished. We just have a little bit of concrete work left. Projects such as the Grand Avenue pedestrian bridge have taken more than 10 years to design, identify funding, and complete the construction. So it's a pretty amazing accomplishment. Over the last year, very significant construction projects have been completed within the city. The work associated with SMART's Larkspur Extension is being completed. Several key components of that work, such as the Anderson Drive rail crossing, were completed, as well as the installation of the multi-use path from Rice to Anderson Drive. The reconfiguration of Francisco Boulevard West to eliminate 2 rail crossings in San Rafael has also been completed. At this time, SMART anticipates finalizing the major construction of the Larkspur Extension in August 2019. And train testing should commence shortly thereafter. DPW is working with a consultant firm to incorporate a quiet zone from the downtown station to Cal Park Tunnel. We anticipate this quiet zone to be in place prior to the start of revenue service, which is anticipated at the beginning of next year. Traffic signal improvements were also implemented this year with modifications to parking times in the canal area and modifications to signal timing, which included a lead pedestrian phase on some downtown crossings. So as you travel through downtown, you'll probably notice that the light turns green in a little bit later than it normally does to allow pedestrians to start crossing the roadway. Public Works and Parking Services are working together to examine the data associated with the East San Rafael striping and signage, and should get back to council regarding this program in the future. All right, I'd like to kind of cover some new projects that we're taking a look at for next fiscal year. However, we want to kind of go over a little bit of our process as well of what we utilize. The development of the CIP utilizes a process of soliciting input from all city departments and taking into account city council concerns. In addition, other city plans and studies influence the CIP, such as the general plan, the facility assessment study, which was finished this year, the bicycle pedestrian master plan, which was finished this year, as well as staff input from all departments. Department directors or their representatives meet to rate the projects, which formulate and prioritize projects each year. From there, we work with our finance department and further refine the list based off the budgetary constraints. The city utilizes a process to review and prioritize projects. The Department of Public Works meets with the city department directors to rate each project. We have utilized a rating system based off of 5 categories where each project is given a numerical score. We usually have more projects than we have money, so therefore we've got to prioritize some of these things. This year we also added a separate category for projects that have outside funding sources or grants. These projects get rated separately and generally are elevated in priority, which since many of the outside funding sources have specific deadlines. So if we get FHWA funding, it has a specific timeline which we have to comply with. This provides a basis for prioritizing new projects. So I'll kind of run through some different new projects this year. Currently, the city has more than 20 different buildings, including parking garages. Repairs and improvements to these facilities are funded through the Building Fund number 603. Last year, we finalized a facility assessment study which reviewed a majority of our buildings and I identified needed repairs for those facilities. This year, CIP addresses the high priority repairs noted in that report. In addition, staff from Public Works and Community Services have been working to replace several modular buildings for after-school services at Mary Silvera, Pickleweed, as well as Dixie Schools. Modular buildings located on school properties require interaction with the California State Architect's Office, which involves a complex review process. In addition, acquisition of modular buildings has a very long lead time due to recent disasters in the state. Public Works and Community Services anticipate being ready to replace these modular buildings in the summer of 2020. We have to make sure that we have a same timeline as the schools. Can't exactly put a modular building there when the kids are still in school. In addition, the design efforts for renovating Fire Station 54 and 55 are well underway, and construction is anticipated to commence in the fall of 2020. As mentioned before, some of our drainage facilities are very important that we address each year. We want to make sure that we replace different parts of our 12 pump stations that are on a regular maintenance schedule. So we want to make sure to include those. Parks projects. In 2019, we utilized a strategy of replacing play structures in Pickleweed Park without changing the footprint of the area. Neighborhood interaction was utilized to select the play equipment, which eliminated the need for a design firm and also minimized the cost. Public Works staff and Community Services will be working together to replace play structures at 3 other parks in next fiscal year. Other improvements are needed at Albert Park to provide better accessibility to the ball field bleachers and restrooms. Right-of-way projects. Public Works will be moving forward with developing roadway repair projects such as a roadway repair at Cartwright and Southern Heights, as well as considering additional parking modifications near Albert J. Borough Center, right near Spinnaker and Canal. Additional funding from Measure A funds as well as the gas tax has helped to increase the amount of roadway repair and resurfacing our city can perform. This year, our roadway repair program includes treatments for the Canal Street, as well as Smith Ranch Road underneath the highway, and Francisco Boulevard West near Anderson Drive, as you drive onto the freeway. Next year, we plan to start some significant traffic projects in fiscal year 1920. In particular, the city has several grants available to make improvements to the signal systems and roadway from Grand to Miracle Mile along 3rd Street. Several projects along this corridor are anticipated, which can involve bike path connectivity in the west end, as well as a new fiber optic backbone, which will further update our signal system to provide a more dynamic coordination with our signals and improve circulation through this entire corridor. All right, we're getting to our star player here in a minute. Talia, hold on. While we have covered this in previous CIP presentations, it is important to note that the cost of construction continues to rise. Simple repairs are more costly today with high labor costs, material costs, and a demand for construction efforts throughout the state. Some of our buildings are more than 50 years old and have continued to deteriorate over time. Continuing to allocate funding for repairs is important to maintain these facilities for our community. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Talia. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm just going to take a few minutes to just go over some of the major sources of funding for our capital improvement program to just help provide you with some context of how we allocate our resources. So we're going to start here. We're going to cover each of these on their own slide. But I just wanted to start with the 5 major, what we would call consistent annual funding sources for our capital improvement program. So one would be our building maintenance fund, followed by our Measure A parks. You will see that we actually brought forward the CIP with the Measure A work plan every year, which is a requirement to bring back to the county of what we're going to spend those dollars on. Our stormwater fund and those 3 make up the sections for city-owned property, parks, and drainage. And then for right-of-way and transportation, we're funded by our gas tax, which includes some Measure A transportation sales tax dollars, as well as the traffic mitigation fee. I should note that all of these funds listed here are what are considered special funds. They're actually not part of the general fund, and they do have a small operating budget within them. But these figures that you're looking at is just what is used in those funds for capital projects. So that's why it might be a smaller figure than what you might see of the total, for instance, Measure A parks dollars. So starting with our building maintenance fund, this is an internal revenue fund, which means the general fund contributes to it every year, $500,000, and we use it for all city facilities. We use it for instance, buildings and parks. In the past, where we've had pump stations that have been needing repair, we've also used the building maintenance fund to support some of those important pump station projects. I should note that the building maintenance fund, of course, is not used to support our Measure E essential facilities projects. And also important to note, you will see on the CIP, there's going to be several projects for departments that are actually enterprise funds, which means that the revenues that those departments earn should support the operations for those funds. So for instance, several parking structure repairs are actually within the parking services fund, and then the child care portable replacements, those are actually going to be within the child care fund. Just a few projects that you will see on the upcoming 3-year CIP that are funded by the Building Maintenance Fund would be the B Street Community Center restroom remodel, some of the ADA improvements at Albert Park, some of the City Hall server room upgrades, and Terra Linda HVAC replacement. The Measure A parks, you will see there's a lot of background information in the staff report on this, but it's a countywide 9-year quarter-cent sales tax that was approved by voters in 2012. And of the revenues that Measure A brings in every year, it's the County Parks Department that oversees Measure A. 15% of those annual revenues are actually distributed to cities and towns and special districts in Marin. So of the almost $500,000 that San Rafael gets every year from Measure A, about $140,000 goes towards parks capital projects. So of course these include playground recreation features. Most recently, Albert Park had Measure A dollars in it. Victor Jones did. Some projects coming up that have Measure A dollars would be the Sun Valley Playground, as Kevin had mentioned, Gersel Park Playground, and we're actually, we've earmarked in the work plan, you will see $20,000 for the design of the pickleweed synthetic field conversion so that we can go forward with some grants for that. Unfortunately, we do not have enough in Measure A dollars to actually do the conversion. It's several $1 million. I should note, of course, that Measure A for parks is very exclusive in what we can use those funds for. So it cannot be used for city facilities that are not part of a park. The Stormwater Fund, we have about $850,000 in revenue every year. It's about 22-year-old parcel tax. The average San Rafael parcel owner would be paying about $28 a year for residential, or $270 for commercial. And this, of course, funds pretty much our entire stormwater program. So about, of the $850 a year, about $700,000 of it is used for some of those photos you saw earlier in the slide deck about some pump replacement, motor replacement. So that seems like a very large figure, but if you think about the 12 stormwater pump stations that we maintain that go back to the 1960s, and of course our citywide storm system, where we do have to do replacements of our corrugated metal pipes that are underground, as well as culverts, we use that pretty quickly. The state gas tax, of course, is a percentage tax on every gasoline gallon that is purchased here in San Rafael. It's distributed back to jurisdictions in this by the state based on how much gas was purchased in those jurisdictions. And of course, the big thing about the gas tax is Senate Bill 1, which was passed in April 2017, which actually doubled the gas tax that the city receives from the state every year, from about 1.1 million to 2.2. We use this, of course, for all projects on the roadway. The idea behind the gas tax is that the more gas you use, the more you're using your roads, and therefore the more you are paying, which worked really well until hybrids and electric vehicles. So therefore, Senate Bill 1 sought to really kind of remedy some of the wear and tear on our roads, even though we love fuel-efficient vehicles that the new electric vehicles were doing. So some major projects in the upcoming years, Smith Ranch Road resurfacing is a big Senate Bill 1 and gas tax funded project. Anderson Drive, of course, our sidewalk repair program continues to be funded by our gas tax dollars. And crosswalk improvements as well. And moving right along, the only other piece I wanted to call out in our roadway transportation dollars, because we recently had a refresh of this in November, but our Measure A transportation sales tax is actually it's also called Measure A, of course, not to be confused with Measure A Parks. We have a lot of Measure A's and now a Measure AA. But it's a countywide 20-year sales tax, which of course was passed here in Marin to fund transportation improvements countywide, and the Transportation Authority of Marin oversees the Measure A sales tax. The only piece here that's very important to our CIP, as Kevin mentioned, and especially important to our resurfacing program, is we get a chunk of dollars every year that comes to us no matter what. It's a formula based on your population in Marin, and it's about 700,000. Actually, next year it's more because we are getting Measure A and Measure B, which is a one-time funding, and we're also getting the new Measure AA dollars. So that has really helped out our street resurfacing program. You'll see we actually have a $2.6 million program, where 2 years ago we had a $1.5 million program. So helps because, of course, construction cost is going up, and of course now we're able to cover more streets in Centerville. And finally, I promise I'm almost done. The Traffic Mitigation Fund is a fee charged to developers upon condition of approval. So essentially, this is, of course, to mitigate what is considered additional trips that might be associated with the development in San Rafael. So the annual revenues really just vary on the development, but I threw an average there of $500,000 a year, so sometimes it's way more, sometimes it's way less. But of course, there is a piece of the general plan which identifies circulation improvements in the city and lists about 40 different projects that improve congestion, improve circulation, improve mobility in San Rafael, and that's actually what these funds are used for. So it's just important to note that it's not that the funds from a particular development are used for circulation at that site. They can be used anywhere in the city, so long as it is increasing capacity and moving congestion through San Rafael in a better flow. Some things that we're using the traffic mitigation funds for in the CIP, the 3rd and Heatherton intersection improvements, the study of that, even though the construction is a grant, and some major signal improvements downtown. So that is all to say that all of these funds together, plus some additional very project-specific funding sources, I've listed a few assessment district grants, donations, would be our total CIP funding. And as Kevin mentioned earlier, once those projects are rated and prioritized, we essentially draw a line where we no longer have funding, and we keep them in there to keep track of our capital projects, but they are listed as unfunded. And Bill definitely wanted a wow factor in here. So we wanted to show you of our funded projects just how much is coming through Public Works. So in our 3-year CIP, please note that the Measure E projects are in here. So this is really a roll-up of all of the funded project totals. But our CIP, you know, if you include our current year active construction, is actually $130 million of projects. So, wow.
That's a big number.
It's a lot coming through little Public Works.
Excellent report. Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this together. Comments, questions?
That's one quick question.
Sure.
Yeah, and it was a great report. Thank you for making a really complex with lots of detail subject matter easy to digest. So thank you. And I know we're just giving feedback, right? We'll be adopting it when we get the budget. But my question is very more overall, and you alluded to it. So with the adoption of more EV vehicles, How will that affect our gas tax money? Maybe not next year or the year after, but as we're looking out 5 or 10 years, we get a big chunk from them. So what are we doing to recognize that is probably going to change?
Yeah, so there actually was and I can get back to you with a little bit more information about it, but how they wrote Senate Bill 1 in 2017 was really this outlook of you could no longer rely on this formula that the more you drive, the more revenues you're going to get. So they actually changed, not only did they increase the gas tax, but they changed a lot of the ways that they collect fees on it. So they actually get a lot of gas tax revenues now from different registrations for EVs, and they have their own, I think it established a new class of a gas tax-like fee when you have an EV vehicle. So,
well, that's a good response.
Yeah.
Keep some of that money coming. Thank you.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Yeah. So several of the items in the CIP list reference Prop 68 funds. And my question is, having only a passing familiarity with Prop 68, can we expect that funding to continue in future years?
Great question. So Prop 68 is, there's 2 major rounds of pretty large, it was on the ballot last November and it passed, and it had kind of, or 2 Novembers ago, had a pretty big package for park and community programs statewide. So we actually, what we listed on the CIP is there's two parts that really matter for us as a city in Prop 68. One is there's a really big grant program, and we actually are looking at applying for the Albert Park Synthetic Field next year for that. And the other piece is there's a per capita program. So every city and jurisdiction in California actually gets a formula based on their population, a guaranteed chunk from Prop 68. So we have allocated our per capita piece because we know it's coming, but we of course have not allocated out a grant. But
and just to clarify, you meant Pickleweed Park, right, on the synthetic field?
Pickleweed, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then also, you make reference to, and we're all very excited about, now that we've completed the Grand Avenue Bridge, and we're continuing, and this is also, of course, in goals and objectives, we're continuing with our goal of expanding the sidewalk along East Francisco from the Grand Avenue Bridge down to Vivian. Thank you, Kevin. In conjunction with that, and any insight on timing would be terrific, but in conjunction with that, can we expect to repave East Francisco along the length of that expanded sidewalk as well?
Very good question. The grant funding associated with the sidewalk does not include resurfacing, but I'm pretty sure that as a city, we want to come back and look at that section of roadway and repair it. It is in pretty bad shape right now, and it does need resurfacing. So we would want to look at least a year down the line when that project is finishing up to make sure that we have something else coming into play where we could resurface the street. So we want to plan ahead for it and try to make the timing work.
And then last question or comment is, as you, I'm sure, saw earlier in the our response to the grand jury on wildfire prevention, there's commentary about being sufficiently prepared so that we can reverse the direction of travel on some of our arterials so that we can enable better or more efficient evacuation of large numbers of vehicles. You mentioned the fiber optic infrastructure that we're laying so that we can communicate with our traffic signalizing throughout the city. Would that enable us to, in some central fashion, through emergency services, to change the direction of travel on some of our streets, assuming we put up the requisite signals on at the various intersections?
It's a great question. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to respond to it. I think Rafat, our traffic engineer, would be better acquainted responding to that specifically. However, we would have to make sure that we had the infrastructure that could be used. Right now on 3rd Street, we have signal heads that face eastbound. And if you reverse the direction, you'd have to make those signal heads turn around somehow. And I don't think there's any way that can be easily done. So we would have to look at that a bit.
Well, 3rd Street is the example I was thinking of. If we're going to make the investment we intend to, and we're going to put in fiber optic to make sure that everything is working correctly, why don't we ensure that we have adequate capacity to do just that, should we later install the infrastructure that allows us to change the direction of travel? Seems to me to make sense.
Be glad to take a look at it.
Thanks.
Also sounds like a little bit of chaos, but
yeah.
that
No,
set them aside.
Little
I was like, what am I, in London? Mary.
Question. I want to shift gears a little bit. You guys have done just your usual brilliant job of using your rating system, coming up with the projects that are funded, everything, focusing on continued great work. What I want to talk about, though, are the unfunded projects, the things that you're not doing, and get some sense as to the urgency or the status of this group of unfunded projects. Over the years, are they getting better? Are these new funding sources allowing us to get further down the triage list? Or are they not? Are there things in there that are nice to have but we can live without them? Or are there urgent things that we should be thinking about? That's my question.
That's a great question, too, and I think we'd have to go back to our process. What do we use as far as a process to take a look at that? The idea of keeping them all on the list is so that each year when we meet with the department directors, they have an opportunity to say, hey, look, this is extremely important for us to, I'll just make something up, a generator at one of the fire stations. We need to have that, and last year we rated it as something low. This year they have the opportunity to change that rating so that it competes with everything else. So the intent is to try to pull in all the departments and whoever they want to assign to come forward to raise that priority. Obviously, we have a fixed limited amount of funding, and so that has to come into play each year. But we are relying on the rest of the departments to raise that priority.
And generally, are things getting better, staying the same, or are we getting further behind, generally?
Some things better, some things not so good. I'm sorry, I don't have a straight answer for you. For instance, on the B Street Community Center, we probably need to take a look at the HVAC system at some point in time. Is it working? Yes, it's doing okay. Is it past its useful life? It's pretty well close to it. We need to look at that. But so far, we have a good facilities group that manages that. And if there are significant problems, they come and tell us right away. And same with the folks at the community services, different facilities like Terra Linda Community Center. I believe this year we have an HVAC system that's on the list. They felt that it was very important to get that done. So we rely on our other staff members to bring that forward to us.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could add on to
Yeah,
that,
sure.
Mary Beth. Those are excellent questions, because I know we've talked about the funding of the unfunded in previous years. And of course, I'm always thinking of Bungalow Avenue, and I know that's on the funded list. But to that end, do we have projects where we put money aside, like our little savings account? And that didn't come through in here, and I didn't know if we're still doing that. Like the Lincoln Avenue Bridge repair, $4 million, I would think that might be a priority. I don't know what's needed there, but that's a big number. So is there an approach where every year we're putting in some aside so that in 3 years we can start on that project?
Yes, we do that, especially for projects that we can't seek grant funding for. Bungalow is a good example for that. It's a local street that was built many, many years ago, and it's very narrow. Now, utilities are very close to the surface of the roadway, so that when we resurface, we have a concern that the utilities are too close and we're going to damage them. So that's a good example of where we have to set aside money each year to come back and address that project. The other project that you referenced is Lincoln Avenue Bridge. It has a substructure that's cracked, and it's not going to fall in on itself. It simply needs to be repaired. We're seeking state and federal funding on that because there's a bridge repair program. So through Public Works, we try to look for as many grants as we can in order to fix our roadways, things that Talia mentioned for different funding sources. So at this point, I think the couple projects that we're looking at where we set funding aside have to do with the synthetic field at Albert J. Borough Center, as well as Bungalow Avenue.
Yeah, good question, thank you. Just a couple of things. First, SMART to Larkspur. I need to correct you.
Okay.
By the end of this year.
Okay.
Not first part of next year, the end of this year.
Oh, sorry about that.
Hopefully I'm right about that. It's on the record. I'm good with that.
Cross my
Second, when you evaluated the various projects, you showed an example, I think it was, And you had immediate threat, the first column, and I was just curious, what does that mean?
So if you have a roof that's ready to fall in on itself, where you've cleared out the area underneath the roof, that is an immediate threat to whoever's working in the building itself. So you've already cleared it out. Or if there's a huge pothole or something where the corrugated metal pipe is falling in on itself. To
Could
me,
you go back
that's
to that
immediate
slide,
threat.
because that's not quite the context. I'm just curious at this point, quite frankly. It's way back when, it was early on.
Sorry, my eyesight isn't
It goes
too great.
further.
Getting there.
There you go. See, it's fire station 54, 55, immediate threats 10. What, I guess I don't quite understand
Well-
what that represents.
Again, we're sitting down with the department directors and asking them, is this a threat if we do not touch Fire Station 54 and 55? We don't do anything, is there a real problem here that firefighters are not going to be able to respond?
That
And-
assumes an earthquake or some such thing?
Yeah, because the building is so old.
Okay, all right, I was just curious. And then, finally, we're setting aside 500,000 for maintenance. Maintenance is always one of those things that seems to go first, or maybe not as far as you like. Most recent, Falkirk, I think the roof was 500 grand or some such number. I don't know if it came out of that fund or not, but it was a big number. So I'm curious, kind of along the lines of Maribeth's question, is that the right number? Have we used that for some time? Are we funding that adequate? I don't know how you define adequately, you might, but are we in the right place with regard to that funding?
Well, we have, the city has set aside around 500,000 each fiscal year.
Right.
I believe several years ago, there was a little bit of a surplus where we put aside $1 million into that same fund
Right.
as well. So far, I believe it has worked well to have at least $500,000 in there. I mean, it's always good to have more to work on some of our buildings if we can.
Right.
But so far, the $500,000 has been sufficient.
Okay. Well, oftentimes, that's the first thing that seems to go, not here necessarily, but, you know, with companies and so on and so forth. Let's see if anyone from the public would like to address this. Looks like Bill might.
Hello again, Bill Carney, Sustainable San Rafael. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that kind of jumped out at me and their importance. The sea level rise study was mentioned in the as one of the items that would be funded. That, of course, is a very important initial step of one of the priority CCAP 2030 items that you adopted a month or so ago. So it's great to see some movement on that. Also, Francisco East, as has been mentioned, is a great extension from the dedication of the bridge this week, and one that actually was mentioned, referenced way back during the downtown station area plan and some previous plans, the importance of connecting the transit center and downtown to the canal. So it's really great to see, you know, these plans becoming reality in an incremental way. Likewise, I noticed buried in here somewhere was at least some planning money for the Marydale North Promenade. Again, a very important connective tissue up there, and takes some of the Civic Center plan, which you adopted a number of years ago, and actualizes that and connects up with the vision of a promenade throughout North San Rafael. And this, of course, is a great example of coordination also with the county having put in a multi-use path from the other direction. And finally, would invite you in that area to see the fruits of all this by taking a walk along the new multi-use path from the Civic Center station south and west. And that simple 8 feet of asphalt has converted a remnant oak forest into essentially a park, and it's just a beautiful walk. And again, the fact the city is kind of looking at, you know, investments by others and helping to fill the gaps to really make a coherent walkable city is really to be commended. So thank you very much.
Good points, Bill. Thank you. Good evening.
Kate Powers. I just wanted to emphasize some things that Bill said and also just encourage multi-benefit projects. I think there are a lot in the city. When we look at our open space areas, not only do we want to protect them and prevent fires there, but it's an opportunity to remove invasive species, not just cut them down. So to the extent that the CIP funding and the fire prevention funding could work together on things like that. And I think that would be a very good use of the Measure A funds. In terms of the stormwater Phase 2 regulations, which the city will be responsible for, I know that Prop 68 also has some stormwater grant funding, especially for communities, disadvantaged communities. And this is a really good time to be looking at, every time we do infrastructure improvements, how can we incorporate stormwater and not active, maybe engineered, but also passive, where we have swales and rain gardens and capture water that infiltrates and goes more slowly into our creeks, that then also reduces flooding downstream into the canal area, or also up in the Santa Benicia area. And that just leads me also to the Marydale project. Also, I live in Terra Linda, and Marydale is a great connectivity between the Maltese Path that's running along the tracks on adjacent to Los Ranchitos and up to the promenade in Northgate. There's opportunities in the city to really include our CIP projects with our urban design goals, with walkability, using stormwater infrastructure to plant trees and really have kind of a green streets approach also. So thank you.
Thanks. Like your comments. Anybody else? See no one, will return and final comments, or perhaps a motion with regard to the first item. B1.
I'm ready for a motion. If that's, I move that we approve the Measure A work plan for the proposed expenditure of Measure A funds for July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020.
Second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, that matter carries 4-0. And now to item 2, accept the information report regarding preliminary 3-year capital improvement program.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
That matter carries 4-0. And thanks once again for a really outstanding report. You've accomplished so much this past year. It's pretty remarkable. So thank you. Thank you. For the whole department, even the guy in the back there. Turning to council members' reports. Any?
I do briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
So
Of course you do.
yeah, last week, I think it was last week. I'm losing track of time now. Yeah, it was last Wednesday. The Marin Telecommunications Agency met, and the next day, the grand jury's report on the Marin Telecommunications Agency, principally, was released to the public. So while the MTA couldn't take action in connection with the grand jury report publicly on Wednesday evening, we did designate a subcommittee, of which I'm a part, to analyze the grand jury report and prepare a response on behalf of the MTA. That response, however, may be of use by other jurisdictions, the member jurisdictions of the MTA. So as we analyze the grand jury report, I'll be reporting back and sharing the results of that analysis.
And thanks for serving on, and thanks for addressing the issue. It's a little more complicated this time around. Any other? No successor, and therefore we are adjourned.